the wiring on this trailer is going to be stout. 800 degrees or hotter. But it's like people are afraid to do it the right way. You get the soldering iron hot, obviously it needs to melt the solder. I got real thin wire, doesn't take very much temperature to melt, but you see it melting. I make sure it's clean, put a dab on there, touch the connector. And some people, this is why they quit, they get impatient. The connector has to get hot enough, and you see it'll just suck the solder right into the wire. But that's the right way to do it. And then obviously pull the shrink tube over it. It was hot enough it started melting it already, but that joint is now gonna last. Got another one over here to do. Try to zoom in. And actually I was quite intimidated when I first started having to solder wires at a dealership, because you got to make everything like factory. And once I started doing it, I didn't want to do it any other way. It was almost addicting because I like welding. Kind of reminded me of welding. And I mean, if you just play around, take some wire and extra connectors if you have it, and just play around with it once you get the hang of it. But the biggest thing is people don't let it get hot, and the solder just tends to bounce off the wire or the connector. Now obviously the bigger the wire, this is a very small wire and connector, the longer it'll take to get heat in it, and more heat per size of the wire. And there's probably a lot of people out there that are thinking, wow, that's a lot of work for the ground circuit that doesn't really need shrink tube. Or, well, when you're rolling around with the business logo on the side of your trailer and your shit looks all hokey, nobody's gonna call you for work. So let that cool down. I'll screw that to the frame. Here's what we got: how to solder wires correctly. First of all, these are new clean wires, or else you'd have to clean it with Scotch-Brite or steel wool or something. The next step is twist them as fucking tight as you can. The tighter the better. The looser the whatever you can think of. Step 2, don't forget your shrink tube. You're only a dumbass if you solder your wires together before you put your shrink tube on. You're going to be cutting it apart somewhere else. After you get your shrink tube on, we'll go to step 3. Step 3's coming. Just be patient. Now, after you twist the individual strands as tight as you can, twist the strands together as tight as you can. The tighter the better, the looser the worse. After this, you'll get your soldering iron as hot as you can. The hotter the better. It'll take the solder into the wire easier. But do not forget step 2. Don't forget your shrink tube. And yes, sooner or later I'll get to step, well, I don't know, whatever we are at, 3 or 4. I'm sure I'm taking my time twisting the goddamn wires together. But as soon as we get this done, we'll get some solder. And as you can see here, I'm about to show I have a simple power probe, soldering iron. Anything that gets pretty hot will work. It needs to be able to melt the solder. If it'll melt the solder, usually it'll set the solder in the wire. Be patient. The more patient you are, the better the solder will come out. That's everybody's problem, I think, is being impatient, not letting the wire get hot. If you do that step, you are golden. As you can see here, it's turning out pretty good. I got 2 or 3 more wires to do, and then we'll pull the shrink tube over it, torch the shrink tube, do not burn the shrink tube, and it'll turn out good. And obviously you can see by the 3rd wire, it's taking it in the quickest because the soldering iron is the hottest. So if I would have lit it sooner, probably would have went a little faster, but for the example and the how-to, you get it. After they cool, you can tell a little tug test. They stay together. They seem pretty strong. Pull your shrink tube over them. Make sure it's not too hot or your shrink tube will start shrinking. But once you get it over there, take a torch. I have a mini one. Heat your shrink tube, shrink it, call it good. Here I'm just taping everything off all together, so it's all one big harness. It's for my trailer, so this is good enough, or I would have another protective going over it. Butt connectors suck. Some are decent. The ones you heat and they melt and shrink to the wire better than others, but the right way to do it is to solder everything, heat shrink it. It tends to last. So